I see some of the same names and faces as from the last workshop. I know it's a long day for some of the time zones, so thank you so much for joining us and being here with us. This is now an official welcome from NYU CIC team and all of our partners to the second workshop for today, workshop within the bigger workshop, how we call it, co-creating futures of capacity building for data-driven peace-building work. There's no need to give an intro to people who were there at the previous workshop, but for those of you maybe who are joining just this one, just a quick summary of what we did for the previous 1.5 hours and what the general idea behind the workshop is. So we are using the workshop as a framework to gather practitioners from peace building and humanitarian fields and to try really to imagine together the future of data services. And for this specific workshop, we are imagining the futures of capacity building for the prevention and peace building work. The idea for these workshops is, as Paige mentioned in the previous one, is partially coming from the publication that NYU CIC published exactly a year ago on data for peace building and prevention ecosystem mapping. And when I say that the idea is coming from this report, I actually mean that it's coming from you as practitioners in this field who were interviewed throughout this process. And many of you actually shared in different ways the need of building the data capacities and the need of building human capacities to drive innovation and to drive greater impact. And all these gaps and needs that you mentioned led to this idea of and to the final recommendation of creating some sort of a hub for data and technology for the peace building and prevention. The hub that can potentially just enable better outcomes of this work, that can create and facilitate creating partnerships across different sectors and enable cooperation. And I think conversations that we had together yesterday and today show that our field still has many challenges. We discussed some of them again in the previous workshop. I think we ended up with more questions than solutions and concrete steps for moving forward, which is also great to generate some questions and brainstorm together about them. And again, just to mention a few of them, again, the big question of lack of data or good quality of data, trust in data, many ethical questions that are I think came in every single discussion that we had throughout the 2 days, how to protect data and how to protect populations that we are trying to help with utilizing this data. And I think that none of these challenges can be faced without building capacities on data-driven approaches, including, we heard so many times this, building data, developing data literacy, again, ethics, data-driven methodologies, capacities to use and understand data. And once again, we are learning from good practices from our many partners and supporters. And this time, again, it's a great pleasure to actually work this together with our partner, with the UN OCHA Center for Humanitarian Data, to share with us lessons learned from their experiences so far. So I will not take any more of the introduction time. We already broke the ice, but I will again share the Miro link, the whiteboard that we were using in the previous session. I will just invite all of you to continue using the Miro to put some of your thoughts out there. Our team will also do the notes and just keep all of these lessons that you are sharing with us to finally put it in the final report as lessons learned from this workshop. So with this, I will introduce our two introductory speakers for this workshop. It's a great pleasure to introduce Caitlin Rogers, who is a data literacy lead at the Center for Humanitarian Data. And Caitlin is actually can I say a mastermind as well, Caitlin? Behind the workshops, we work together on designing both of them. So it's really a pleasure to hear now on your work and your dedication to building capacities in individual and also organizational capacities for data-driven peace building work. Before I give floor to you, Caitlin, I will just introduce Paige Arthur as well, NYU CIC Deputy Director. I don't think big introductions are needed. Paige, you are also another mastermind behind the entire event and all of the work between data for peace building and prevention program. And Paige will also tell us a little bit more about why NYU CIC is doing this and why do we need capacity building for data-driven approaches in the peace building and prevention field. So with this, I'm giving the floor first to Caitlin and then to Paige.
Great, thank you so much. Can I just confirm that everyone can see my screen? I'm not at the right place, but yeah, great. Okay, well, fantastic. I'm so excited to be here. Welcome, everyone. I hope for the participants who were in the other workshop, I hope it was fruitful. I was able to join for the two speakers, my colleague Javier and Christina Goodness. And so, yeah, it's great to see such fruitful discussion. And as Sarah Telford, who's the director of the Center for Humanitarian Data, she mentioned kind of at the beginning, at the opening of the workshop, she was a speaker, and she talked about this importance for this collaboration. So I love sharing across development and the peace nexus. Actually, my background is actually in development. So a lot of my capacity building experience comes from that space. And what I've seen working with, I started doing data literacy and data training around 2011. I've worked with not-for-profits, I've worked with private foundations, I've worked with governments, I've worked with newsrooms and now the UN. And what I see time and time again is fundamentally people are very similar. So I think around data literacy, there are a lot of places that we can share strategies and approaches and even resources. So yeah, I thought I would start with a little bit of a state of play. So these are kind of the three reflections I've been having recently on kind of where we are in terms of data literacy. So the first thing, which is a big change from when I started doing this work in 2011, we know that we have a problem. There's an acknowledgement that we need to build data literacy, which really wasn't the case a decade ago. A decade ago, it was really, we can hire a few technical staff and that will solve our problem. We need to use data, but we just can hire a few computer scientists, put them in a room, and that's sufficient. And increasingly, I see organizations acknowledging that that's not sufficient. So yeah, this comes from the UN data strategy, using data as a core competency for organizations in the 21st century, but we are not yet prepared for it. So that's like the first thing, the state of play where we are that I have been reflecting on. Second, and kind of similarly, there's a growing awareness that data literacy is more than a narrow set of technical abilities. So again, back in 2011, when I started doing this work, it was a lot about teaching people how to code or teaching people how to make data visualizations and maps and things like that. And that's still incredibly important. And I still do a lot of that work. But there's an acknowledgement of a broader set of data skills. So this is one way, kind of, I love a mental map. This is one of the ways I think about it. I think that there are these kind of strategic data skills, the knowledge and capacities required to ensure that data is managed like an asset. So this is everything from making sure we're making the correct investments in data, making sure we're managing data responsibly. There's kind of a ton that can fit under that category. Sense-making data skills, which are the kind of magical abilities to translate data into decision-making, and translate strategic priority into data exercises. And then the technical, kind of more technical skills, which are really the specialized knowledge and capacities required to like execute data exercises. And you know, in any given day, we might do all three of these. Many days out of the week, I do some strategic data thinking and I need strategic data skills. I do some translation work and I do some technical things. So this is not to say like that we kind of fit in one box, but there's a broad range of skills that we need to be thinking about and kind of building capacity around. And finally, we are not alone. As I said, I worked for a long time in development, then moved over to the humanitarian space. And every time I've ever worked with an organization or set of organization, it's always this problem is uniquely difficult for us and we are uniquely far behind. But I actually think that many organizations are facing the same challenges and we can really do this together. You know, I have tons of examples from private companies that are doing the same type of things. So this is really not like a, you know, development peace humanitarian challenge. This is a 21st century challenge. So I think that there's some, I feel like that we're in a good place, or I feel really optimistic about where we are compared to where we were maybe a decade ago. So on to a few lessons learned very, very quickly. And again, this is drawing from my work at OCHA, but also drawing from my previous work in development and working with newsrooms and things like that. So my first kind of lesson learned is we need to go beyond one-off trainings. So what we know is that one-off data trainings, they're not enough to develop the type of whole of office approach to data management that is required. They tend to be focused on technical skills, which I do not think is sufficient. It's hard to go beyond these kind of one-off trainings, or it's hard to like do these one-off trainings because organizations have so many different audiences that require training and skill development. It's difficult to know where to start, and it's hard to imagine even finding the time and resources to train everyone. And so the way I think about this and the way that we've been approaching this at OCHA is trying to integrate. We do some specific data trainings for specific audiences, which I will talk about a little bit later, but we also try to integrate data literacy as a component in existing trainings. So meeting people where they're already learning about other aspects of humanitarian the humanitarian sector, humanitarian work, the work of OCHA, and integrate sessions and talks into these existing trainings. We find that this is a way to reach people repetitively, and it's a way to kind of reach a broader audience and kind of maximize our efficiency. So really finding ways to integrate data literacy into existing training initiatives, existing learning programs, and making it really clear kind of across the board that data is part of the work of everyone within the organization and helping everyone understand the role and the impact that they have on data management within the sector. So that's kind of one of the ways that I have been thinking about it is like one-off trainings are important. They're great for building specific skills, but integrating data literacy and data kind of capacity building sessions in other training is incredibly important as well. So don't overlook the basics. I can't stress this enough. And beyond even just the basics, for me, it's really about building a conceptual understanding of data and concepts related to data. So I talk a lot about like helping people understand how data does and does not represent the world. People with technical or data skills already kind of have an understanding of how data is kind of constructed and the impact that that construction has on the type of analysis that you can do. But it's really important to constantly remind people that we are making decisions in the data that we're producing, and those decisions influence the data that we have. And so building this kind of conceptual understanding of data helps to really form a strong foundation for building specific skills on top of, and it supports knowledge retention. The challenge, of course, is that this kind of more conceptual training, is quite difficult to design. So that's where a place where I think we can really learn from each other and share strategies. But tangible outcomes can also be difficult to demonstrate. So it's, you get people together and they talk about data and learn about the basic kind of concepts of how data works, but they didn't learn a specific skill. They can't do anything. They know a lot more now, but they can't maybe do something. So that can be a bit of a challenge. So we've been trying to find specific places where we think it's really important for people to have a conceptual understanding of a topic, and then building and integrating a kind of tutorial, follow-on tutorial with that. So we'll introduce a topic, we've been designing kind of videos to teach people. I'm so sorry about the dogs going crazy in the background. They are all completely fine, I promise. But yeah, so kind of developing videos and other kind of learning resources to introduce specific topics, and then having tutorials where people can kind of implement those as well. So you get a little bit of a mix of both, but really this kind of the basics and the conceptual understanding to me is the most important thing. And once you get there, you can really build skills on top of that. And finally, I think this is my last one, maybe there's one tiny one at the end, is to determine what you can curate and what you should create. And so I think that this is really, for the discussions that follow, is going to be incredibly important. There's so many things that we can train on, really figuring out what for your organization is the strategic priority and designing specific training programs to support those skills, the development of those skills. And then looking outside of your organization, maybe even outside the sector, to curate other types of learning things for things that are a little bit more tangential. So for us, for example, when we started the data literacy workstream at the Center for Humanitarian Data, we did a lot of research. We talked to a ton of people to really understand where the challenges were. And we found that like the biggest gap for training within OCHA specifically was for data training for OCHA specifically was for this kind of broad swath. They're called humanitarian affairs officers within OCHA. And there was no data training targeted specifically at them. Nevertheless, when we talked to them, they were working with data all the time. So this was kind of our audience where we're like, for them, we need to create a data training program. So we created something very unique and tailored to their specific work that's quite intensive, that lasts over a few months, because this for us was like an audience that could be transformative for the way OCHA manages data. But other audiences, we kind of curate. There's resources developed by other parts of the organization, which we try to share or teach people how to use. But I also think it's to be careful not to create what I call kind of a data literacy Pinterest board. Data training programs really need to be designed to guide learners. So helping create a path for someone who is like, I know you need to do X, Y, and Z. And so here are the resources that I recommend to do that. So kind of building facilitation manuals and other type of resources on top of existing resources to help guide people through resources that are already existing out there. So those are some of the things that like I've learned that I think are incredibly important. And the last one, just to kind of wrap up, is to start somewhere. I think this is the most important thing. There's so many people to train. There's so many skills that we could be developing. There's so much that we can be doing, and that can feel really overwhelming. Like, okay, well, there's, X number of people at this organization. I have to train more or less all of them. Where do I start? Well, anywhere, based on your mandate, based on the strategic priorities of the organization, based on interest from people within the organization. Start somewhere, find a low-hanging fruit, and try things out. So yeah, those are some of my kind of thoughts and reflections. I hope they're useful. Again, I'm so sorry about the dogs and the madness. We're having a team Christmas party at my house this evening and my dogs are crazy. So over.
Thank you, Caitlin, so much. Thanks for the great presentation. I think this is super useful. Thanks for sharing these concrete steps of lessons and what can actually be done. I like how you pointed out at the very beginning, it's not the challenge of a specific organization, it's really a more of a 21st century challenge. So this is exactly why we are doing this and trying really to do this event to gather different sectors, organizations across different sectors, because we also believe we share these challenges. So sharing lessons is also part of the story. Just to, before I give floor to Paige, I want to tell to the audience that Caitlin will not be able to stay with us in the breakout rooms, but feel free to put questions for her directly in the chat. So Caitlin, maybe you can have a look at the chat and still refer to some of the questions while we still have you before you go and enjoy your party. Paige, floor to you.
Thanks, thanks Branka, and thanks Caitlin. And I really felt that the dogs were adding a kind of human element to that. So I appreciated that. And I hope your party goes well this evening. So on capacity building, so Branka mentioned that I should talk a bit about the work that CIC has been doing on this issue, particularly capacity building on data-driven approaches for peace building and prevention. But I don't want to oversell what CIC has been doing. This is a very difficult issue. It's a challenge for the broader ecosystem. It's not something that a single small organization like CIC can solve. One thing I would highlight is that we have been piloting a partnership with DataKind, who I think we have at least one person here today from DataKind, and they're a kind of data for good actor here in the United States that has much greater resources, a deeper bench, as they say here in the United States, access to all the tech companies, to volunteers, and long-term relationships with people who have the data skills. So what they do is they work with organizations to strengthen their use of data, and they have a whole model and strategy for that. So for us, our model for capacity building has really been in relationship to partnership within this larger ecosystem and trying to put resources together. So that's the direction that we've been thinking about. But I really appreciated Caitlin's overview, particularly of the training aspect. Caitlin, I hope that you can tailor something for the prevention and peace building field, because it's very comprehensive and it's really excellent. So why do we need capacity building for data-driven approaches in the peace building and prevention field? Well, where do I start? Where do I start, really? Truly, the needs are vast. And when I review some of the issues that were raised, particularly yesterday in some of the sessions, the challenges are clear. So it's not just about the tools, like learning to use new technology like GIS or having some fluency and descriptive statistics. These tools are just the tip of the iceberg. And this is why the Center for Humanitarian Data's model is really so interesting, because it's not just HDX, it's not just the data, it's also building resources and building capacity for the field as a whole. So this is really important. So let me give you a few examples. These are all from yesterday, actually, to illustrate the scale of the capacity building needs. So capacity for protection. One example from Rakesh Barania of Salesforce, who made several impassioned observations about how data can be used by threat actors, including governments, citing recent examples in Afghanistan and Myanmar of governments gaining access to biometric and other data that can be used to create target lists. Second, capacity for data literacy. Caitlin went through this. Yesterday, we heard from Sarah Spencer, independent consultant and report author, who noted that data-driven approaches are too often segmented apart from the people who actually own the problems on the ground, own the solutions on the ground and ultimately own the risks for that data use in fragile contexts. And I'm paraphrasing her because she was really talking about humanitarian contexts, not necessarily peace building, but she was talking about people like the frontline peace builders, like the community educators, human rights defenders, et cetera, who are closest to solutions. So we need a significant upscale in data literacy for those actors, as well as in impact assessments of what happens when new tools are deployed, really at ground level. So the third capacity issue is around bureaucratic and organizational capacity. So beyond the need for data literacy, for in-house tech and data capabilities, there's also an organizational need for policy and legal expertise to review and to assess potential negative impacts. So as Cameron Berga of Microsoft argued, if you're even thinking about using AI in a sensitive place, you need to pull in your policy and legal people before you approach the technology side. It's got to be built in from the start. But in the peace building field, many, if not most organizations just don't have ready access to this kind of expertise. And then a fourth issue, which really I think came up in our previous discussion that we just had on data services, is around capacity for data storytelling and the need for data to connect to ground truth for it to be meaningful. So these are some examples, and I could really go on here. And I don't see easy solutions. So this is a long-term challenge. It's going to require a larger ecosystem in order to both build but then sustain capacities. And so that said, I'm very interested to explore with this group here the practical value that a hub might have, or even hubs, maybe regionally based, closer to the ground. I mean, there's lots of different models for this, but the practical value that something like that could deliver to support the emergence of an effective ecosystem for capacity. And so the needs, again, are things like staff development on data literacy, including staff who can translate between the tech and data side and the peace building worlds. There's a need for standard and ethics development or consolidation of existing standards, a go-to resource for organizations that lack the expertise on legal and ethical issues, or who need advice, for example, on ethical partnership with the private sector actors. There's a need for capacity building on impact and threat assessment, for capacity building on conflict-sensitive design, for user and people-focused design, for capacity building on data ownership and methods that integrate feedback loops with the vulnerable communities that data is being collected from. And there's a lot more. So as I said before, this is the tip of the iceberg. I'm looking forward to the discussion today, and thanks very much. Back over to you, Branka.
Thank you, Paige. Thanks so much for also giving us this summary of all of many conversations that we had yesterday. It's definitely a huge iceberg. We have a lot of things to discuss. And we will actually follow the same model as in the previous workshop. Before that, I just want to mention that Caitlin did leave her contact email in case you have any additional questions for her. Feel free to contact her. And with this, with all of the great points that Caitlin and Paige left for us, I think we are ready to go into the breakout rooms. We prepared a set of prompts or guiding questions as well, similar to how we did in the previous workshop. So you will be guided through some of these questions by three great colleagues and guests who are joining us for this session as breakout group moderators. So this is a welcome for Nicole from German Federal Foreign Office, Minji from Information Management Unit, DPPA, DPO, and Razia Kimani, Peace and Security Advisor from the African Ideas and Resources. I will invite each one of you to first introduce yourselves in the breakout rooms, maybe tell a little bit more about your background and work in this topic, and then start a discussion again. I posted again the link to Miro board that we started using in the previous workshop. So this is an invitation for all participants to jump on Miro again, and while you are doing the discussions, feel free to use Post-its and put some of your thoughts on the Miro as well. And NYU CIC team will also follow the discussions and do the same. So with this, I think we are right on time. We are ready to go once again in 3 breakout rooms. Hello again, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had exciting, interesting conversations in your breakout rooms. Our conversation was actually cut. It was very interesting and active. I was in a room with Nicole, who actually brought so many interesting new questions to the table. I thought, Nicole, that we figured out all of the questions out there, that we need only the answers, but your experiences really brought so many new insights into this conversation. So I see we are now all back in the plenary. Thanks to our breakout moderators for leading conversations. Now it's the time for you to do a summary of what you discussed with your groups. So we can start actually with Nicole. Nicole, if you are ready, the floor is yours. Take a couple of minutes to tell us what our group actually talked about.
Yes, thanks a lot, Branka. And as you said, so we touched upon a lot of different points, and we could just, I guess, have some introductory comments being made. So this is really an interesting field, and I guess there could be hundreds of thousands of follow-up discussions on this. So I just want to highlight some of the points that really, stuck to my mind, or that I really would like to share as takeaways. So one is that I guess a lot of us agreed that it's really important before you even build a data analytics capability in your institution, it's really important to have a business case analysis. So what is actually the value for bringing in data science or using data in a more, like using it more often and more frequently in your institution. And then also this question of which products are actually most accepted in your institution. So is it visualizations, dashboards, or either, or even predictive models? So what is the acceptance? And then also we learned that basically there's a variety of acceptance for different products. So I just shared that in the German FFO, people love visualizations and even static maps because they can integrate them in final policy briefs. However, prediction models, not so good, because they are highly complex, very difficult to explain. People are very skeptical also about the ethical implications. They would say, no, we have our experts on the ground. You don't tell us, where conflict might escalate. Also with the visualizations, I had a talk with a director from UN SSC last week, and she said that in the UN, people love dashboards, even at a very high level. However, here people would just use the static map. So it's very different across different institutions. And I guess this business, analysis or case analysis would be really helpful. Then also that it's critical to establish processes. So not just having a data hub, a center where you just do learning or training courses or hackathons or conferences or whatever learning methodology you want to use, but it's really about those sustainable and long-term processes and dialogue between data scientists and practitioners, but also across the different communities of peace and security, humanitarian development, and then actually also, and this is what Paige so well said earlier in her presentation, really engaging more with the field offices and the people on the ground working, really, and using the data, but working in the regions that are relevant as well. I guess this is a really critical point here, being in this interactive dialogue process. And then maybe one last point, we always talk about building capacities for like increasing learning and data literacy for practitioners. Actually, I think it's also important as data scientists to understand the political implications of the choices we make, like which data we select, which terms to use in our visualizations. So just last week, we had this user dialogue on a new climate security dashboard we are building. And there was a department head. He said, do you actually know what the political implications are here by which data you select and which terms you use? Because there's a wide variation across different institutions of how to interpret this climate security crisis. And by using specific terms, you might impose the German interpretation to different organizations when you provide a tool like this open source for everyone to use. So this was really interesting. I'd never thought of this before. So those are the points that I would like to highlight. Maybe Branka wants to add on.
Thank you, Nicole. I think you covered everything. Thanks so much again for bringing these lessons from your very own work, as well as just showing us how complicated the conversation about a capacity and planning for capacity building is, how much we need to think about the context, not only in geographical terms, but even institutional ones. So this one was very interesting for me to think about. Thanks, Nicole. I will immediately give a floor to Minji and to introduce you properly now, Political Affairs Officer from the Innovation Unit, United Nations, DPPA. So sorry, Minji, for again using the wrong title. I've been updating it all over the place on all of our platforms. Hopefully I got it right this time. Thank you, Minji. You have a floor now to tell us what did your group discuss about.
Yeah, we had such a great group, and I think this is a reflection of the expertise in the room. We had a room of practitioners from the UN, from government, from academia, and mostly very much interdisciplinary actors. And this is reflected in the conversation that we had. So in addition to kind of points that they highlighted from their experience, such as the usefulness of data quality, trust, there was also a talk about highlighting the needs according to data pipeline from collection all the way to actual data storytelling. But I think one point that I want to kind of emphasize is the need for human-centered approaches along all pipelines, whether it's messy, whether it's clean. The human-centered approach was something that everyone had agreed on. So there was a talk about kind of having the same language. So focusing on an interface where you have the same, you don't need codification basically for different data pipelines, for different APIs, and you can use it to do the quick analysis. And there is a tool on knowledge graph analysis that Bijan mentioned that can be further kind of looked at. Not many practitioners actually look at this. This makes it easier for policymakers and for researchers to understand what the data availabilities are to suit the policy needs. So those kind of technological kind of considerations. There was also a lot of mention on community empowerment. So why are we really using data, which really goes back to trust and highlighting the capacity, but also the ownership of data by the communities that we serve. And finally, one point that I thought was interesting was about the foundation. So making sure that despite all of the human-centered approaches, we have to always question who is it in terms of design? Who is really designing it? Are we replicating any bias? Are we replicating any institutional bias? Potentially that could lead to the kind of further erosion of trust and civil liberties. And there was a mention about the institutional bias of police and how the technologies that they are using in terms of data is replicating the bias in that very esteemed institution. So very, very interesting insights, a lot from experience and some also concrete recommendations that I thought was pretty cool from this short session.
Thank you, Minji, for bringing us closer to the conversation of your group. I think this is super interesting, and also to hear how trust is coming back into the conversation. Again, bias as well. So I think this is a very, important part of building capacities to recognize our own biases when building these tools and even utilizing data. Thanks so much, Minji, for sharing those insights. We have another group, so I'm inviting Razia now to share with us what your group discussed and what some conclusions or ideas for next steps are.
Thanks, Branka, and thanks to my group. I think we had a very robust conversation. Not enough time, as usual, as happens in these breakout sessions, but we did make the most of it. I got kicked out at some point. I had some tech challenges, but the group was so efficient, they continued without me. So, some of the key, things, some of the key things that we discussed, what came out, I think, quite clearly is that we do not necessarily have an issue around data collection. The main issue or the main problem seems to come around the analysis of that data, the translation and interpretation of that data. And then, more so making that data useful for different audiences, whether it's, peace builders at the community level who, quite frankly, would rather be engaging with people than dealing with data, to, policymakers who really, we really have to help them get excited and understand, why data is important and useful, and that would require, different kinds of products. Other challenges, came up around, the basic, the challenge around, the basic data literacy, the capacity challenges around basic data literacy with peace builders. And, linking that to peace builders, particularly in the field, organizations that are not very large, networks that may not necessarily have the capacity to have, data analytics and people, working on that, as well as, doing the work around the conflict prevention and the peace building. And I'll talk to a strategy that, came up as one of the suggestions on how we could work around that. Another challenge, that we discussed was, the challenge around, sorry, my apologies. Yeah, no, I think actually that covers it for the challenges. So around some of the strategies that we discussed and thought that, could help overcome some of these challenges and next steps to take this forward is, having an understanding around what are the pain points when it comes to data, so that way then we can address and know the kind of data that is needed by the different audiences, different actors, or within an organization. And then just the need to take stock of what is already there, because people repeatedly stated how there's a lot of data that's available, but not necessarily being utilized in the ways that it could really be best used. Other strategies that have proved very useful is building communities of practice, and linked to that is having the opportunities for cross-sharing between actors, organizations, entities, individuals, and a lesson or a caution around not being in a constant phase of piloting projects, that we can't keep piloting when people's lives are at risk. And so we need to figure out, this is my own words, my own paraphrase of it, we need to figure out how to fly the plane, build a plane as we fly it, quite literally, and have learn from our mistakes as we go along. And so these communities of practice are very critical, would be critical for that. Another strategy that I think came up quite clearly was having interdisciplinary teams, that this is very key in helping to address some of the capacity challenges, particularly around translating the tech, for prevention and peace building. And last and definitely not least, is the whole idea around having hubs or a hub, a go-to place where, different organizations and entities can actually feed in and also benefit, from the information that's there that they would not necessarily be able to do as an organization. And so I'll stop there for now, unless Paige would like to add to anything.
Oh, thanks, Razia.
Thank you so much, Razia, for guiding us through this very interesting conversation that that your group had. For me, it's quite interesting that we actually quite often hear these opposite thoughts about the data that we have, the availability of data out there. You mentioned there is no issue about data collection, like, and what we have out there. And then we quite often hear that, no, we need to open more pathways to data. Like there are still so many blind spots or fields and areas out there that we don't know anything about, or even countries that are somehow excluded out of this conversation because the data is not being collected. So I think this is maybe a part of completely new discussion that we can have maybe at some other workshop, but this is super interesting to hear from practitioners some ideas about this. I would also like to go back to the conversation that we had in the previous workshop, and I went to Miraboard to actually check what Bidyan shared, something similar, Razia, following this conversation. And I want actually to use this quote because I liked it a lot. What we need as part of the next steps is to join forces and make less better. So until now, we were so concentrated on this quantity and getting the more and more data, but we still have a long way to do in actually doing better work with what we currently have. And just to again go back, and now I apologize for those who were not there for the presentation in the first workshop. We had the HDX presentation showing how the amount of data was changing throughout the time, and then you see this quantity being bigger and bigger. And I'm just thinking, like, if we are envisioning futures, where do we see the future of this data-driven work, and then also capacity building. And again, to connect this conversation with the previous workshop, somebody mentioned that we maybe need some middle space as well in terms of the capacities. You know, not all of us need to become data scientists and experts on that field, but maybe we have some sort of, and Nicole, this connects with your comments as well, how do we build capacities to actually also reflect to users that are using this? So is there some, and it seems to me also following our experiences from previous workshop on conflict early warning, early action, that we do have more and more of these middle level tools, that we don't need to become data scientists, but we can actually start using some of these approaches. So I'm now trying somehow to summarize as well the discussion that we had. Razia, want to come back to your metaphor of flying, fly the plane, and as we fly it, right? I'm picking this up because we had a similar metaphor from a colleague from ICRC at one of the sessions yesterday about the train. I believe it was ICRC. And this is very interesting as well to look at, like we have this plane or this train that is moving really, really fast. And it's really the question now for us, how to build the capacities to jump on the train, but also not maybe jump too quickly before we know where this plane or train is actually heading to, or maybe building capacities to even drive ourselves a bit and make sure that the destination is where we actually want it to be. So this is just quick from my side, but I think we have enough time to build the audience again in. If there are any last thoughts from participants, if you want to share some of your ideas and visions, how to build the capacities for the future, feel free to unmute yourselves, show your cameras if you can, and share this with us. If there are no further comments or ideas how to build the capacities, I will then maybe pass to, well, before I give floor to Paige, I will also tell you what are we going to do now out of all of this great work and great thoughts that you shared with us throughout the two workshops. You saw in the mirror that we were putting some of the comments. We were also recording these sessions for the purposes of making a report out of this. We will delete the recording afterwards. And the idea is really to share all of these lessons and to try to find somehow together what these next steps should be. But first understanding what the gaps and needs are, and then to see how we can together just envision this future. Either this is building one hub for peace building and prevention data, or any other direction in which we should go into the future. So you can expect from NYU CIC side as well to hear more from us in terms of summarizing these recommendations together, of course, and with your insights. With this, Paige, I'm passing the floor to you if you have any final thoughts.
Sure, and Branka and I have been doing a lot of talking, so if anyone wants to come in, please just raise your hand. So I'll just quickly say that, first of all, thank you, all of you, for your time, for joining this. We really wanted to have this kind of informal, interactive space to brainstorm, really. We have this, in the humanitarian sector, there is the, a central hub, a resource, a humanitarian data exchange, and this is a kind of shining example of what could be done. Does that mean that we should do that as well? I don't know. And so what these sets of discussions surfaced for me was, of course, all the prior questions that we really need to answer before kind of making recommendations or decisions about a direction to go in. And so from the previous workshop, it does seem to me that there are problems across the ecosystem that many actors are facing that could be solved through something like a hub or some kind of consolidated effort. So there's the challenge of just the fact that peace building prevention is a wicked problem, right? It requires lots of different kinds of data analysis to parse and to understand, but also, the need to consolidate data collection efforts, avoid duplication, have baselines that we can draw on, whether at country level, sub-regional level, subnational level, et cetera. Solutions for interoperability of data that came up in a lot of the breakout groups, having the right data for ground up storytelling, and then also being able to identify gaps where we need more granular data. And I was really intrigued by HDX's approach, where they actually have kind of a matrix where here are the key gaps that we need to start filling. So in a way, it suggests that we could benefit from something like this. If we think about this as an ecosystem approach, there are needs across the ecosystem. So, what would be the right structure? So what we hope to get out of this today is to, produce something that summarizes the questions that were raised, some of the solutions that are proposed. It's the idea, let's not create our own hub. Why can't we just fit something within the existing structures? I hadn't thought about that before. But that is a possibility. So I think we should go away and think about this and continue the dialogue and see what might come next. Any final thoughts from anyone on the call? I don't see anyone. Thank you. I mean, it's been a long 3 hours, so I really appreciate it. And thanks again to Caitlin for joining, and also for our breakout room moderators, for Nicole, Minji, and Razia. Thanks, Branka, to you for chairing the session.
Thank you, everybody. Yes, thank you, Nicole, Minji, Razia. Thank you, Paige, and to all of the participants. We still have a program ongoing, so join us in the next panel discussion. Thank you, everybody.